Hey friends, in today's video we're going to be talking about superheat and subcool. Now to be honest, for a very long time I understood how superheat worked, but I had a hard time understanding subcool. And I hope that by the end of today's video, not only will you understand how subcool works, but what does a high subcool or a high superheat mean? How does your superheat and subcool and your pressures look like on a system that's undercharged, overcharged, liquid line restriction? Maybe it's a hot house. Maybe it's a cold house. What do those numbers look like? And those are the 5 specific scenarios that we're going to be going over. Now, to get started, just to briefly go over the refrigeration cycle, the compressor is the heart of the system. The job of the compressor is to increase the pressure. If you increase the pressure, you increase temperature. So we'll call it the pressure increaser. It goes to my condenser where we reject heat. And you have 3 states going on right here. You have vapor, then you have saturated, then you have liquid. Then you go to the metering device, which is the pressure dropper. We're dropping the pressure. And if you drop pressure, you drop temperature. Boom, we go to the evaporator. It's the heat absorber. It's absorbing heat. So right here, we got about 80% liquid, 20% vapor. It's saturated and goes back to the compressor. So the key here for the condenser for subcool, the key, and this is going to be very important, the condensing temperature, right, which is your high side pressure converted to temperature, that needs to be a lot higher than your outside air temperature. So I put 85 as my outside air temperature, and that's the key. Your condensing temperature needs to be higher than your outside air temperature. Now for your evaporator, so we know that the evaporator is cold. The key here is the return air temperature, right, where your filter is at, that needs to be warmer than your evaporator. So you see what I'm trying to come across here with that point, that there has to be a temperature difference so you get a good superheat number and a good subcool number. We'll start off with the easy one, with superheat. A system that is starved, okay? And we're going to go over some specific scenarios down here. But a system that is starved will have a high superheat. Now, I do have a video on the refrigeration cycle. It is important that you understand what sensible and latent heat means. But going back to the system that has a high superheat that is starved, a starved evaporator, and we're talking about 410A as my refrigerant, a system that is starved, you do not have a lot of refrigerant in the system. And because you don't have a lot of refrigerant, you have lower pressure. So typically you want, what you'll see in a 410A system, you'll see between 110 to 160 PSI, depending on how hot the house is, 36 to 56 degree evaporator temperature. And you're always trying to get a 40 degree, but that can change on how hot the house could be. But a system that has low refrigerant, undercharge, your pressure is going to be a lot lower. So the example here is you're going to have a system with 90 PSI. When you convert that to temperature, that's a 26 degree evaporator temperature. And right away, it's like, nope, that's not gonna work because water freezes at 32. So eventually you're gonna have parts of the coil where it'll start to freeze. But look at the superheat. We already talked about how latent heat, right, saturated, as long as it's saturated, temperature stays the same, 26, 26, 26. But once the last molecule of liquid boils off and you only have vapor, now it gains sensible heat, now it gains temperature. 36, 46, 56, 66. Remember, what's throwing all that hot air is your return. You have hot air going through that coil. So you're boiling off that liquid too soon, so you have a starved evaporator. So when you subtract and get your superheat, 66, which is your suction line temperature, minus your evaporator temperature gives you a 40 degree superheat. That's high. Right away, it tells you, I have a starved evaporator. What you should be looking at a system that's doing a good job is, and we're not talking about delta T, right? Although that's important, right? Which is your, the temperature between the return and the supply. You're looking at, let's say you have 80 degrees. You want about 60 degrees coming out, 18 to 21, but we're just gonna focus on superheat. A system that's working normal, and we're using a TXV in this case, this is going to vary, right? 36 to 56 degree evaporator temperature. In this case, we're using 118 psi. So that's a 40-degree evaporator temperature. Okay, so as long as it's saturated, as long as you have a mix of both, the temperature is going to remain the same. 40, 40, 40, 40. Now you have less and less liquid and more vapor, but it's still a mix. And then right here, you gain sensible heat because it's only vapor, and boom, you have a suction line temperature 52 minus 40. That's a 12-degree superheat. And the job of the TXV is to maintain an 8 to 16-degree superheat. So it's doing its job. So the hotter the house is, the more refrigerant you're going to throw into the evaporator side. So you have more pressure, evaporator temperature increases, and also the heat of the air interacts with the vapor molecules. That also increases the pressure. So hence, higher pressure, higher evaporator temperature. But in this case, we're using 40 degrees. A system that is flooded, your suction pressure is going to be a little bit higher than usual because you have too much mass, too much refrigerant. Now, I am talking about an extreme flooded evaporator here because typically, if your system's a little bit undercharged or a little bit overcharged, your TXV will compensate for that. You'll see that more on the high side of things, on the subcool number. But we're talking about a very flooded system. So when you connect your gauge, 170 psi, that's a 60-degree evaporator temperature. So you're not going to do great cooling. But when you get your superheat, 60, 60, right? As long as it's saturated, 60, 60, 60. And boom, it only boiled off, let's say this part. So once you get your superheat, 62 minus 60, that's a 2-degree superheat. That's too low. That's a flooded evaporator. And guess what? It can be even worse. It can be where your liquid comes all the way to your compressor and your suction line is 60 degrees. Your evaporator temperature is 60 degrees. So what's 60 minus 60? 0. You're still saturated. You're still liquid. That's going to mess up the compressor. But that's the superheat. That's the evaporator. What about subcool? Okay. So a system that's flooded, and I want you to kind of see the example with this, right? And I know I understand. It took me a long time to really understand this, and I'm going to try to explain it in a way that you can understand. So like that, if you explain it to someone or even to yourself, you understand the lingo and the terms. But this is the idea with subcool. The condensing temperature needs to be higher, right? Needs to be higher than your ambient air. That's the key, okay? So let's say a system that is flooded, meaning that it is overcharged, right? 410A, 400 psi, we have about 116-degree condensing temperature. Now, this is what's going on this side. This side, you only have 2 states, saturated and vapor. Right here, you have 3 states, vapor, saturated, and liquid. Okay, so this is what's going on. You're desuperheating. You're getting rid of sensible temperature. Then you have saturated. Then you have liquid. So let's talk about a system that's flooded, that is overcharged. We're having changed. The outside air temperature is still 85. So think about this right here, 140 and 116 right away. And these are just numbers, more or less, just to prove the example. But right away, you lose a lot of temperature. The thing is that with the system that is overcharged, you're going to run a lower vapor temperature. So when you come this way, your discharge line temperature is not going to be that hot. It's actually going to be kind of cool, right? It's going to be kind of cool. So going back to this, and of course, we're going to go over when it's normal, when it's starved, right? But your vapor temperature on this side is going to be kind of lower. So your discharge line temperature is going to be kind of lower too. And it's going to make sense as we go to a system that's starved. But it's going to be lower. Right away, you lose sensible temperature, and it gets to the point where it's saturated. How do you know what the condensing temperature is? When it's saturated, we'll connect your red hose. Whatever PSI it gives you, that's your saturated temperature, that's your condensing temperature. So boom, 116. So we know that as long as it's saturated, temperature is going to stay the same. So the thing is that with the system that is overcharged, because you have too much refrigerant, and remember, here's the key. Can 116 go into 85? Absolutely. And you're going to see how that varies with the system that's undercharged. 116 to 85, you got about, what is it? 95, 106, 106, about 30-degree difference. You can definitely reject heat. You can reject a lot of heat. Because 116 to 85, it's 116 and 85, you see? So you're going to reject a lot of heat. So because you're rejecting a lot of heat, your condensing temperature is going to be a little bit higher because the liquid is taking up space. And when you do the math, right, because the liquid is taking up a little bit of the space, the condenser coil surface, you have a little bit less of that. Your condensing temperature might be a little bit higher. When you do the math, 116 minus 96, you have a subcool of 20. So that tells you, man, you know what? I have a lot of liquid, or I'm overcharged, or something's happening where it's piling up. It's piling up a lot because I have a 20-degree subcool. Remember, the engineers already created this so that it's 8 to 12 if it's properly charged. But since it's 20, you're backing up. You have a good column of liquid, but you have too much of a column of liquid. You're taking up some of that space for the condenser. So it's creating a domino effect. Your condensing temperature starts to kind of go higher. Your liquid is stacking up. You're rejecting a lot of heat because 116 to 85, you're rejecting a lot of heat, but you're getting a lot of liquid. So that's not good because your compressor is going to work harder, and it's not energy efficient. Now, with the system that is normal, and I'm actually going to change this number because typically it is a little higher. System that is normal, you have a discharge line of, and it could vary, right? 150, 160, around that number, 140. We'll put 160. Right away, we lose 55 degrees. You see that? Boom. The discharge line, the hottest line of the system, because it's 85 outside, boom, you lose like 55 degrees. And then you get your condensing temperature. As long as it's saturated, right? 105, 105, 105, 105. Once the last molecule of vapor is gone and it's all liquid, then it starts to drop a temperature. So when you get your subcool, condensing temperature minus your liquid line temperature, not your discharge line, your liquid line, you got 10 degrees. And a subcool that is normal is 8 to 12. So when you subtract 105 minus 95 is 10 degrees. So we're rejecting heat, you see? It's not that crazy like this one. 116 and 85, you're rejecting a lot of heat. You're producing more liquid, less surface area. Over here, 185 to 85, that's what, 20 degrees away? There's a difference. So you're going to reject heat and you're going to get a proper column of liquid. This is interesting here though. With the system that is undercharged, and I have in mind right here with the system that's overcharged, higher pressure, system that's normal, and this is just an example, 340, system that's undercharged, 262 psi. It's a lot lower because you have less refrigerant. When you compare a system that is starved, for example, high side and low side, lower pressure over here because you have less refrigerant, lower pressure on the high side because it's lower. Here, it's going to be normal range, and they go off of the CTOA, condensing temperature over ambient, based on the SEER, right, of the unit, but it's going to be around here, right? This is going to be a good number. When the system is overcharged, you see higher head pressure, higher suction pressure. But coming here, your discharge line temperature, because remember, it's all about the vapor temperature on this side. Because it's higher, 66, your discharge line temperature is going to be a lot higher. And there's something called volumetric efficiency. The refrigerant coming on this side, you want the compressor to compress a good vapor temperature, but the hotter that vapor temperature is, the more less weight that it has, and you're just expanding that more, and you're going to end up with a higher, not only with a higher discharge line temperature, but your vapor molecules are going to be more expanded, and when it's more expanded, you're going to have less mass, less weight in a way, and because you have less mass, less weight, your pressure on this side is going to be lower. You have less refrigerant on the system. So even though you have a higher discharge line temperature, your pressure is going to be really low. And so this is what happens. This is the one thing that took me a bit to understand, and I kind of kind of figured it out after researching. But the reason why you have a low subcool, think about this, your condensing temperature, when you do the math, it's 87. Can 87 go to 85? Yeah, it's a 2-degree difference. But the key is the condensing temperature has to be a lot higher to reject more heat. So what was it? 105 and 85? That's good. 116 and 85, you're rejecting too much heat, right? More subcool liquid. But 87 and 85, that's not too much of a big difference. So when the system's on and is rejecting heat, this is the key. Most of the energy and the time is being spent on saturated, meaning that it's not converting it to liquid because I don't have a big difference in temperature. And because I don't have a big difference in temperature, it's only 87 and 85. It's spending most of its time trying to get the saturated refrigerant to liquid, but it can't because it needs a big temperature difference. And you only have 2 degrees temperature difference because you have less refrigerant, low pressure. Those vapor molecules, you're just expanding them more. So you're going to end up with a high discharge line temperature. And that's a good way of finding out if your system is undercharged, a high discharge line temperature, but your pressure is going to be low because you don't have a big temperature difference. Most of that energy is being focused on the saturated, and it never gets to liquid because it's got to be a lot higher to reject more. But because they're almost the same, you're not really rejecting heat. It spends all that energy saturated and it never goes to liquid. So when you do the math, 87 minus 87, that's a 0-degree subcool. So when it comes to this, and we're going to talk about this right now, a system that is undercharge, overcharge, liquid line restriction, a hot house, and a cold house. Suction pressure, superheat, high side pressure, subcool. Now we are talking about a TXV, and we are talking about the system being severely undercharged and severely overcharged, because we did say that a system with a TXV, if it's slightly undercharged or slightly overcharged, it's going to compensate. So we're talking about a severe undercharge and overcharge system. So think about this, and a system that's undercharged, okay? Undercharge, you're going to have a low suction pressure, right? You don't have a lot of refrigerant, and a high superheat. You have a starved evaporator. So suction pressure is going to be low. Superheat is high because you have a starved evaporator. You don't have a lot of pressure in the system, and you have a high superheat because the liquid molecule, the last one, boiled off too early. It's starved. What about your high side pressure? We talked about this, right? Your high side pressure is going to be low because you don't have a lot of pressure. The compressor doesn't really do a good job with the high vapor temperature. You're just expanding that vapor molecule even more, and it doesn't really have mass. You have a high discharge line temperature, and you don't have a big difference. Your subcool is going to be low. So here it's going to be low. Your high side pressure and your subcool is going to be low. So don't let it confuse you. Right here, the key is the condensing temperature needs to be a lot higher to reject heat and get liquid. We're almost the same, right? You saw that 87 degrees condensing temperature, outside air temperature 85. High side pressure is going to be low. Subcool is going to be low. High superheat, low suction pressure. A system that's overcharged. Right away, we know that my pressures are both going to be high because you have a lot of refrigerant, a lot of volume. So suction pressure high, high side pressure high because you have a lot of refrigerant. Now remember, my superheat for my overcharged system is going to be really low because you have too much refrigerant. And we're talking about a really flooded evaporator, okay? So it's going to be a low superheat because even though hot air is going through it, you have too much refrigerant pushing through. So you have a low superheat, and your subcool is going to be really high because your condensing temperature, when it comes to an overcharged system, flooded, the difference is a lot bigger. So you're rejecting more heat, but you're building up more liquid column, taking up some space. And when you do the math, you're going to end up with a high subcool because you have too much rejection. You're producing too much liquid. High subcool. Liquid line restriction. Right away, just think about it. Liquid line restriction. If there's a restriction on the metering device, nothing is going on the evaporator side of things, okay? You're gonna end up with the low suction pressure because there's no refrigerant going through, low. And if there's no refrigerant going through, think about it, no refrigerant going through, it's gonna simulate something that is undercharged. So you're gonna have low suction pressure and high superheat. So in this case, low suction pressure, high superheat. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Liquid line restriction. We're not undercharged, okay? That's the key. We're not undercharged. So my subcool is, I'm gonna have subcool because I don't have any loss of refrigerant. There's still refrigerant in the system. So depending how bad the restriction is, we'll put normal to high. You're gonna have a subcool number. You're gonna have a subcool number because no refrigerant is going through, the liquid is stacking up on this side. So you're gonna have subcool. My high side pressure though, a lot of people think it's gonna shoot up really high. The only time I've seen it shoot up really high is when you have a complete blockage and you have a big system with a lot of refrigerant. But typically, your restrictions are not completely zero. You lose, your sensing bulb loses charge. It's a minimal restriction. So normally you're not gonna see this one high. This one here is gonna be normal to low. Some people might say it's normal and that's okay, but if you can't absorb heat, you can't reject heat, right? So even though, think about it, if you're not absorbing heat, you can't reject heat. So there's less heat in the system. So your head pressure is gonna be normal to low. But this is the dead giveaway here. Your subcool is gonna be normal to high, normal. And right away it's gonna tell you, oh, I have a restriction. It looks like I have a flooded condenser, but a starved evaporator. Because nothing's coming on this side, but it's all stacking up over here. So that's kind of the key right here. Flooded condenser, not because it's overcharged, but because there's a liquid line restriction. And then right here, starved evaporator. Kind of, that's the idea behind it, okay? Flooded condenser, starved evaporator. But just don't let it confuse you with if it's flooded, normally it would be higher, but it's not. But it'll be normal, right? But this is a dead giveaway here. A hot house, okay? Hot house, your return air temperature is coming in pretty hot, pretty warm. So your suction pressure is gonna be high because the sensing bulb is gonna be on the suction line. And it's gonna be like, whoa, this suction line is getting pretty hot because I have a lot of hot air hitting me. Go ahead and react with the refrigerant in the sensing bulb. The pressure is gonna go up, gonna push on that TXV to give to open up and send more refrigerant through the metering device. So you're gonna have more pressure present on the low side of stuff. And then the hot air is gonna also interact with the vapor molecules. They're gonna start going a little bit more crazier. Your suction pressure is gonna be high. But this is where it confuses a lot of people, at least it did for me. And this typically happens when you barely turn on the house or the house is really hot. You're gonna end up with a high superheat. Because let's say it's a really hot house, okay? Your TXV is adjusting, it's doing its job. But if it's a hot house, and let's talk about maybe this one right here. If it's a hot house, you're dumping more refrigerant, right? More refrigerant on this side. Let's say it's 96 degrees. And there's something called approach. Typically, and I think it depends on the system you're working on. Right away, if you get the return air temperature and you subtract 30 or 35, that should be your evaporator temperature. But the idea is that the hotter the house is, your suction pressure is going to also go higher, right? So right here, you probably have, it's just an idea, 56 degree, right? Evaporator temperature, because the sensing bulb's like, give me more refrigerant, and there's more heat, but then you'll probably end up with a little bit of a high superheat in the meantime, right? So let's say now, so right now you have 76 minus 56, 20 degree superheat. And that will only happen in the meantime while the house cools down. I'll eventually drop down to your 8 to 16. But initially, your evaporator temperature is going to be higher. Your superheat is going to be high because it's really hot. The system can only do the job with the refrigerant that it has. right? And so if it's really hot, dumping a lot of refrigerant through, boiling it off a little bit too soon, but it's okay because eventually the house is going to cool down, or you hope so, right? If it's insulated well. So you're going to end up with a high suction pressure, high superheat, your high side pressure, because you're absorbing a lot of heat, you're rejecting a lot of heat. And typically outside will be hot, because if your house is hot, typically outside will be hot too. Your subcool, normal to low a little bit, but it'll be normal to low because remember the condensing temperature over ambient. Let's say a system that has is a CR14, and trying to remember the number here, but a system that's CR14, if outside is 85 degrees for a CR14, the condensing temperature over ambient will be automatically plus 20 degrees. So if it's 85 degrees outside, your condensing temperature is going to be 105. It kind of goes with it. So if it's hot, if it's 105 outside, your condensing temperature is going to be 125. It kind of goes with it. But at some point, you do sacrifice some subcool because your TXV is opening up all the way, and it's kind of hard to keep and maintain that column of liquid in the back. So more of it is going through. So your subcool will drop a little bit, but eventually it'll go back to where it's supposed to once the house is cooled down. And the last one, the cold house, a cold house. So cold house, or you could put low airflow. So what do you think is going to happen here? You turn on the system when it's 72 degrees and you want actually 70 degrees and you want it at 67, right? This is set point. And this is ambient, right? Inside your house, right? Everything's going to be colder. So your suction pressure, right? Your suction pressure, and it will vary from cold house to low airflow. But your suction pressure is going to be normal to low. Okay, your superheat is also going to be low. Your high side pressure is going to be normal to low, and your subcool is going to be low. Now, why is that? Because if it's cold or you have low airflow, are you going to have more heat or less heat? You're going to have less heat. So you're going to try to boil all that refrigerant. It's going to try, but the TXV is like, imagine I'm the sensing bulb, and I'm on the suction line. I'm like, man, this suction line is kind of cold. Hey, TXV, go ahead and pinch down a little bit more. Pinch, pinch. So what's going to happen? Your pressure is going to start to drop and drop. And if it's a really bad restriction on the airflow, or if it's very cold, your evaporator temperature might drop lower than 32 degrees. And your superheat is going to try to maintain that 8 to 16, and it's going to have a hard time because it'll only pinch down so much. So you're going to see that your superheat is going to be a lot lower because you don't have heat to boil off all the refrigerant. So you're not absorbing a lot of heat, right? Your TXV is pinching, so it's going to be normal to low. Your superheater is like, I'm not boiling off anything. Your superheat is going to be running pretty low. Now, if it's a slight under, if the airflow is not too bad, like if the airflow isn't too bad, you have a filter that's kind of dirty, your superheat might be okay, but you'll see it on your evaporator temperature. You might have an evaporator temperature of 30 degrees, and your superheat might be okay. But we're talking about a pretty bad airflow or really cold house. You're pinching. It's gonna start to drop, normal to low. You're not boiling everything down, everything from the refrigerant, right? The liquid refrigerant, because it's cold, or you have low airflow. Your superheat is gonna be low. If you can't absorb heat, you can't really reject heat. So you're gonna run a normal to low, high side pressure, and your subcool. Remember, we want there to be a big difference from your condensing temperature to your ambient air. So even though you are gonna try to meet the CTOA, but because there's not a lot of heat in the system, it is gonna run a normal, and we can put here normal to low subcool. But the dead giveaway is gonna be right here. Your evaporator temperature might be at 30 degrees or 28. Your superheat might be okay, but we're talking about a pretty cold house, or the airflow is really bad. Everything's gonna run lower. And there's a lot of other scenarios too, like a dirty condenser. Trying to think of other ones if you're working on a system that has a piston. And there's great HVAC troubleshooting charts online that you can check out. But I just thought to just briefly go over, what happens with subcool and superheat, and how when you go to a job, and this is where you want to get to, you can just go to a job, connect your gauges, of course, airflow before charge, check that airflow is good, no dirty filter, condensing coil is clean, wait 10-15 minutes, and then check your pressure, superheat and subcool. But you should be able to go to any job, any unit, and then by you just looking at what's going on, right? And of course, these are just arrows. You're gonna see numbers, but by just seeing what's going on here, it gives you an idea. I know what's going on with the system. Low on charge, overcharge. There's a liquid line restriction. Oh, the house is really hot. You want to get to that point. You want to be able to use your gauges and your temperature clamps to get superheat and subcool, and be able to do that. And then once you understand this, no one can take that away from you. But it is important to understand how superheat and subcool works. Condensing temperature must be greater than your outside air temperature, but not too much or not to the same number, right? An okay number. Your return air temperature must be greater than your evaporator temperature. So that's the principle here, a temperature difference. But the refrigeration cycle is amazing. It works if it's properly charged and there's enough airflow. With the pressure increaser component, which is my compressor, my heat rejector, which is my condenser, my metering device, which is my pressure dropper, and my evaporator, which is my heat absorber, is doing the same thing over and over and over again. So make that a goal. Make it a goal to really understand how your pressures and your superheat and subcool can tell you a lot about the system. And there's even more to this. You can always try to get your delta T, your temperature difference between the return and the supply, your compressor amps, right? But hopefully this gave you an idea how superheat and subcool come into play when it comes to diagnosing systems out in the field. I hope that today's video helped you out, and I'll catch you on the next one.